Active business.
Welcome back. This is TurboCharge Your Business on the number one global business talk and news network on the internet, IBGR, International Business Growth Radio. I'm Patty Lawrence. This is episode 20, People Planning, Accountability, and Metrics. Be sure to go to our website at ibgr.network and download the show notes. So, what are accountability and metrics doing in people planning? Well, a little earlier, we talked about leadership and we talked about how they need to function in three areas, right? We talked about accountability, we talked about responsibility, and we talked about authority. So, accountability, as we put it into this segment, accountability and metrics. Why do we focus on that? Well, one reason is that number one again. So there is one person who is charged with tracking and in charge of projects, right? And that's accountability. Accountability is the person who, let's call it, owns that particular metric, right? Is accountable for it. And again, the opposite of that is if you have two people who are accountable, then we have nobody who is accountable because people are going to be kind of pointing their finger at each other, going, it's not me, it's you. It's not me, it's you. Right? So that creates confusion. So really, there's only one person who is accountable. And then there are metrics that go with it, right? The metrics are how we measure against. So in the scope of people planning, we need to have role descriptions, and we talked a little bit about that earlier. So our role descriptions is really where these things are laid out. Where are the accountabilities and the metrics laid out? Well, they're laid out in the role description or the people description or the job description, whatever you want to call it. What is that role accountable for? So, and how are we going to measure? So, what are some of the things that you can measure? Well, it's going to depend, obviously, on the role or the position. What is that person's function within your company? How does that role function within your company, within certain workflows and job flows in your company? What does that look like? Because that person is an integral piece of the workflow at some point in time, be it an administrative workflow, be it a manufacturing workflow, be it a distribution workflow, be it a sales workflow, a customer service workflow, a human resources workflow, whatever that is, that person plays a role in the overall workflow and the the workflow process. That person has some role in that. And what we want to make sure is, first of all, in the planning phase of it that we discussed just a little while ago, we want to make sure that one, it flows, and two, those people know about that before they get into our organization. Before we hire them into the organization, we've set those expectations. And now that we've set those expectations, they're in writing, right? They're in the position description, the role description. How are we going to measure their success? So, the accountability piece of it, one of the outputs of that is going to be success, right? Are we achieving success? Are we not achieving success for not only the company, right? Because it's a cog in our grand scheme of the building the wheel, but are we also successful in this role as a team member in our company? Are we successful? And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're providing that feedback back to the person in the role based on how are they performing their task. It's not only are they performing their task, how it's quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative is, are you doing the tasks, each of those tasks that that are in your role? Yes, no. How are you doing those? That's the qualitative side of it. So we've got qualitative and quantitative uh, measures, but we also want to make sure that if there are things such as maybe ratios or percentages or numbers of things that are processed per day or number of things that are handled per day, in a sort of a task management perspective, that we want to be able to measure those as well. So what systems do we have in place that will measure that, keep track of that, turn them into statistics? Maybe they're called statistics. Maybe they're, number of bills issued per day type of things, number of widgets produced per day, whatever that the most appropriate measures are. We want to make sure that we communicate those so they're in the role description as accountability and metrics. Number one, number two, number three. And what competencies do our folks need to have to achieve that? Are they coming in at entry level? And that means that they can't or are not able yet to do some of the more advanced work, and they need more training. They need OGT, on the job training, so that they can progress through and be successful for not only the company, but in the role, right? And that also gives them and sets them up for some promotional opportunities. And we talked about that a little bit in the succession segment. So, what does that look like to the person in the organization? Have you documented that? And are you do you have a feedback mechanism to give that feedback, provide that feedback in obviously a positive and constructive way back to the person in that role, so that they can learn and grow and develop and take on more responsibility for you, for your company, for your clients, for your customer, for your community? Everybody wins. So, do you have that in place? And so, what are some of the different metrics that we can look at? Well, of course, it's going to depend on what their function is in your company. So, is it number of pieces processed? Is it number of widgets produced? Is it a ratio? Is it number of sales calls made? Is it number of sales closed? Right? Is it dollar value of sales closed? Is it number of hires? And say you're an HR or you're a recruiter. Is it number of hires brought into the company? Is it cost per something, cost per widget? You've got a lot of different ratios. You've got ratios. You've got different metrics that can be used to measure that. But what is the most appropriate for your organization and for that role? That's up to you to determine. But make sure, this is something that's really important. Make sure that that's leading you right to the goals and it's tied to the goals of the organization. Again, I think we talked about line of sight before. A lot of these need to have a line of sight. Line of sight meaning that they are in line with the goals of the organization, and also that those people that are accountable for those specific metrics know that they have what impact they have on the company, on the company's performance, on the company's success, on another department's success, where does that lead, right? That's the line of sight. Where's the end goal? What does it lead to? Either it's the next, or not only the next, but the next. It's the end goal, right? They may be downstream quite a bit, but you want them to be, everybody's oar is in the water and we're all rowing the same direction, right? You don't want it to be go counter to what your goals are in the company, or counter to the overall strategic goals of the company, right? That that would be counterproductive, not only for the company, but the individual involved, because that person, chances are that person wants to work their way up into the company, right? They want to do a good job. That's why you hired that A-list player, right? That a player, it wants to do well, wants to make an impact, wants to have a positive contribution to your company. So how do you encourage that? How do you give them the appropriate feedback so that it is not degrading, demeaning, all of those D words, um, that it is you know positive, it is encouraging, and it is engaging for them as well as the company. That's the bottom line, is how do you put together those accountabilities and the metrics that keep people engaged and keep people motivated. That's the secret. So once you have that, and you have it for each role, each position in your company, that is going to be the difference maker for you. And that's going to allow you to up level your company and make it a huge success. Next week, our theme is capital planning for your business, where we'll cover growth, facilities and maintenance, cash flow budgeting, and products and services. Check out my collection of free resources at turboexecs.com/turbocharge. And you can continue the conversation with me, Patty Lawrence, on LinkedIn. Thanks for tuning in to Turbocharge Your Business and People Planning on the IBGR Network. I'm Patty Lawrence. See you next time.